Hello! You have reached the Human K channel. Today, we'll look at the interesting work of Erik Erikson, a famous psychologist who is known for his contributions to the study of how people grow and change. Erikson's theory looks at what it means to be a person and how that changes over time. Erikson had a lot of personal identity crises, which had a big impact on his ideas. He added to Freud's ideas by putting more stress on the ego instead of the id and by recognizing that culture, society, and history have a big effect on how a person develops. Erikson says that personality development happens in 8 different stages. A specific conflict that demonstrates both good and bad ways to handle it marks each stage. It's important to remember that how we grow and change isn't just based on our genes. Our surroundings also play a role. The first stage, from birth to age 1, is the oral sensory stage. At this time, people develop either a sense of trust or a sense of mistrust based on what they've seen and done in their early lives. The next stage, the muscular anal stage, happens between the ages of 1 and 3, and it leads to either self-doubt or the growth of an independent will. The next stage is the locomotor genital stage, which lasts from ages 3 to 5. During this time, children either become more independent or more guilty. Lastly, between the ages of 6 and 11, a person may become hardworking or feel like they aren't good enough. As we move from childhood to adolescence, we go through a time when our ego personality starts to take shape. Usually between the ages of 12 and 18, this is a time when people have trouble figuring out who they are. During this time, people try to figure out who they are, but they may also feel confused about their roles. Between the ages of 18 and 35, when a person is a young adult, they are either getting closer to people or becoming more alone. Between the ages of 35 and 55, adults either have children or stop having children. The last stage is maturity, which happens after age 55. During this time, people may feel ego integrity or despair. At each stage, people have the chance to build basic skills that come from their adaptive ways of dealing with problems. Hope, will, purpose, skill, loyalty, love, care, and knowledge are some of these strengths. It's important to keep the ego's adaptive and maladaptive tendencies in balance because relying too much on one can lead to bad growth. Erikson had a positive view of people and emphasized that we have the ability to develop basic skills, solve problems in a positive way, and take charge of our own growth. He disagreed with the idea that we are just the result of our genes or our early life events. Instead, he stressed the importance of learning and social interactions over genetics. Erikson used different ways to test his ideas, such as play therapy, anthropological studies, and psychohistorical analysis. His study was mostly based on case studies, which have given the first 6 stages of psychosocial development and the idea of ego identity a lot of support. But it is important to remember that Erikson's work has been criticized. Some critics say that his language isn't clear, that his descriptions of the psychosocial stages aren't full, and that he doesn't have enough evidence to back up his claims about biological differences between men and women. Recent studies have shown that the identity crisis might happen later than Erikson thought, and going to college might affect how this problem is solved. Other studies show how important it is to build trust early in life and how good it is to give back in middle age. It's important to remember that the development of ethnic identity in adolescence can affect ego identity and behavior in people from minority groups. The cross-racial identity model talks about how a healthy Black identity develops in 4 stages during childhood. The traits of ego identity may also be affected by a person's gender identity. People who have problems because of their gender choice tend to be less mentally healthy than people who don't have these problems. Now, we'll talk about the interesting study that shows how Erikson's ideas can be used and what they mean. In particular, we'll talk about the results that have to do with ethnic and racial identity and gender choice. Let's dive in. Researchers have found that people from ethnic minorities who do well on tests of ethnic and racial identity tend to have a lot of good things happen to them. First, they often feel better about themselves and have more self-esteem. This shows that a strong sense of ethnic and racial identity can help people feel good about themselves and be happy with their lives in general. Also, these people tend to have less positive feelings about illegal drugs, which could mean they are less likely to use them. Also, they tend to get along better with their families and peers, which gives them a sense of belonging and social support. Also, they tend to do better in school, which suggests that having a strong sense of national and racial identity can help with school. People with a strong cultural and racial identity also feel less stressed, which is an important point. This result shows how a strong sense of ethnic and racial identity may help people deal with the challenges and stresses of daily life. Let's move on to study how people choose between men and women. Studies have shown that children from Black and Hispanic backgrounds often feel a lot of pressure to act in ways that are expected of their gender. This pressure can change how they feel about themselves and how they see themselves. Conflicts about gender preference, like dealing with one's sexual orientation or gender identity, have been linked to lower self-esteem, feelings of guilt, and higher stress levels. These problems can have a big effect on a person's health and mental development as a whole. On a more positive note, research has shown that people with a strong gay identity tend to have higher self-esteem and be happier with who they are. They also don't want to change their sexual orientation, which is a sign of self-acceptance and good mental health. These study results give us important information about how identity development and mental health are linked. They stress how important it is to help people develop a positive ethnic, racial, and gender identity because it can lead to many good things and lower stress. That's the end of our talk about the most important research findings connected to Erikson's ideas. Remember that studies are always changing, so it is important to stay up to date and think critically about the results. In our next class, we'll learn about another interesting area of psychology. Thank you, and we'll talk again soon.